with me, Alice, and today I'm joined with journalist, Explorers Club member, and host of Travel Channel's Lost in the Wild, Kinga Philipps. I am so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks.
Now, Kinga has hosted many shows. You might have seen her on National Geographic's Lost Treasures, Travel Channel's The Real, The Wild Side with Kinga Philipps, or Sci-Fi's Legend Quest. Right now she's on Lost in the Wild, which I am absolutely loving. I ate up every episode, and you definitely had my curiosity piqued with so many of those episodes and so many of those faraway places. So I really loved it. I hope that you guys have watched it. If you haven't, you should definitely be binging it while we're all staying at home.
You have a captive audience. That's the nice thing about the quarantine, is any one of us who are putting out content right now, we've got a captive audience.
That's absolutely true. And now tell me a little bit about how you got started in journalism and what really led you into working in TV.
So I grew up in a family of adventurers and explorers and naturalists. My dad is a geologist. My mom is a pharmacist and a botanist. So we traveled when I was a kiddo. Like, we were always in nature. We were always traveling. They really embedded the value of travel, culture, immersion, experience in us. And when I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like, I think most people that age don't. So I went through 7 different majors. And then none of it really resonated with me. And I kind of wanted to lead the quantum leap sort of life, meaning that I wanted to do all these different things. And I quickly realized that the best way to do that would be to get a journalism degree and experience all these things through the eyes of other people and then get to tell their stories. And then I also minored in anthropology because I found humans and our history and how we interact with each other and the world around us super, super fascinating. So I took that path, but then I knew that I did not want to do news. I wanted to do more adventure, travel, immersion, exploration. And when I was a kid, I even wrote a letter to National Geographic and I told them that I wanted to work for them one day. And they were super cute and actually wrote me back and were basically like, "Stay in school, kid." And I got to tell that story when I did the National Geographic show and we did our press tour, and that was an awesome moment for me. But starting out in this business, 20 years ago, I kind of went through the gauntlet that everyone does. Like, I did studio shows and I did red carpet shows and I interviewed people, and it was all right, but it just never resonated 100% with me. And I always knew that I wanted to do travel, exploration, adventure, see the world. And at that time, there just really were not a lot of women doing that. Like, there were women on the news side of it, the Lisa Lings, who's incredible, but there just weren't really on, the network TV side and hosting capacity. And it took a lot of knocking on doors and having to prove yourself relentlessly as a woman in that space to be able to step in those shoes. And at first, it was honestly kind of frustrating because I got to be the sidekick to some guys. And it was even to the point where we would be on camera and I would say something relatively intelligent and they would go, "Oh, cut. It sounds a little intimidating if you say it. So that's really cool what you just said about the karst topography and the limestone and stuff. Like, maybe have him say it and you just agree." And I was like, "You've got to be freaking kidding me right now. Is this really happening?" But that's how it was for a long time. But I think, the ultimate story in all of that is perseverance. And if you believe in yourself and you believe in what you do and you believe in the path that you're meant to follow, you eventually will get there. And I've also had the opportunity to work with some of the best executive producers in the business and creators and networks, and the Jim Worleys and the Bree Tisdales and the Ping Pongs and the all the production companies that I've worked with are amazing, and they were so supportive. And that's gotten me to the amazing things that I've gotten to do, actually.
That's so amazing. And I will say, just being in the adventure space and kind of like hoping to follow in your footsteps one day, that I think you're such an inspiration to women that want to be out adventuring, especially if there's women that want to be in television and journalism. I know that I absolutely agree with you. Here in Los Angeles, which is where both of us live, for those of us joining in, it is, as a female host, and creator, they push you to be in red carpets and doing that kind of thing where you're just asking mindless questions to celebrities or doing celebrity news, and that's not something I'm interested in either. So I totally agree with you. And just, but they all say, "Oh, well, you should do this as part of getting your foot in the door. So I love that you've really like taken a lead and created your own path into being, a leader in the adventure space as far as, and being a woman. So it's really something that I look up to, and I'm so glad that you've led the way, because growing up for me, I mean, the only woman on TV was Samantha Brown, and she obviously didn't do adventure.
She's so awesome. Sam is the sweetest.
Yeah, I love her too. But I mean, yeah, there wasn't anyone else other than Anthony Bourdain and all these men. And so, for years too, I've heard, oh, we love this idea, we love, exploring, but we don't necessarily see a woman in that role. So I think you're definitely breaking down a lot of barriers that have been in place for a long time. So,
well, thank you. And I think these days, you are too. I think all the women in this space now are, and it's becoming more accepted and more warranted. And networks are also realizing that it's marketable and that people want to watch a woman go out and rappel down a waterfall and do really, really cool stuff and speak intelligently on camera. And there are so many women in the adventure travel space and the conservation space that are badass, like so incredible, so compelling, so inspirational and aspirational, and all the things that they have charisma, they can carry a show, like all the things that networks want. Women have that.
Yeah, they do. And I'm glad that you're doing it. I loved Lost in the Wild. We've already got some people in the chat that have been watching it. So I actually wanted to ask you about one episode in Lost in the Wild where I believe you were in India and you're in a cave. JJ has gone off to scavenge for something. So you're alone and two men enter the cave. I was scared for you, but how did you feel in that moment?
It's interesting because like in moments like that, you have a lot of adrenaline, and the way our show works is sometimes we have a bigger team and sometimes it's just myself, JJ, and our second camera, which was Andrew, and then Danny came in later. I think it was Danny with us in India. So for a lot of that stuff, JJ and I are by ourselves and we're setting up all of our own equipment, and we separate out. And we found that cave, and we were following in the footsteps of Justin Alexander, who was our missing person in that case, because he had lived in a cave for a couple of weeks actually, which I don't know how he did. And when JJ left, we'll set up our own cameras and we do the diary cam, and I was speaking to it, and in the middle of that, we had two men walk in, and we had people look at the footage later and tell me what they were saying. And they were harmless. Like they really were just looking for a place to sleep for the night, because we were on this trek to Kirganga in the Himalayas. So we had been hiking, I think it was probably 10 miles to Kirganga, and then we went past that where we found the cave. And there are a lot of porters that deliver materials and stuff to Kirganga who will stay the night up there, and they just sleep outside. And the caves are a great place to shield yourself from the elements because it's so cold at night. It's raining half the time, so it's ideal. And you could see that those caves had been slept in and used for that purpose many, many times over. So I think really they were just kind of like, oh, here's a cave. And they walked in, they're like, there's a girl in this cave. But it doesn't matter where it is. If it's in India, if it's in the hills in Los Angeles, like that's just an unnerving experience when people come upon you when you thought you were all alone. But fortunately that ended well, and they were very lovely and left.
Well, I'm glad that it ended well. And speaking of being lost in the wild or just out in the wilderness, what was your first experience like camping alone out in the wild, and how did it go for you? Were you scared? How did you get over any fears that you had?
My first experience camping alone, I don't remember the first time I camped alone. I do a lot of it now. I like to travel solo. I love camping alone. Like that to me is it's like my nature therapy. It's great. And when I'll backpack sometimes, usually when I backpack, I'll bring someone with me. I think I have too much of an imagination to be out too far in the wilderness by myself in a tent and be like, oh, there's 15 grizzly bears circling me right now. So very often when I go by myself, even nowadays, and camp, I'll car camp. So I'll do my fire and all of that stuff, and then I'll sleep in the back of my car just because I'm like, I've got nothing to prove. And most of the camping that I do, I don't go to campsites. I do dispersed camping. So BLM land, national forest, you're in the middle of nowhere. And I am really particular about safety. When I hike, I don't carry a gun, but I do always have a knife with me. I have pepper spray. When I sleep in my car, I always keep the front seat open, and I keep my car angled in a direction that if anything happened, I could jump in the front seat and drive away immediately. I also do a lot of research beforehand, looking at the area and where I'm going and just making sure that I'm familiar with it. And I've been to Alaska by myself. I actually didn't camp when I went to Alaska because that would have been a little bit extreme. I hiked about 20 miles and had the most wonderful time. And there were these beautiful beaches that you could camp on, but there were also grizzly bears everywhere. So I was like, I don't really need to do that. I think I'll just go back to my little hotel. But I do think that the one thing I always tell people, and especially women, and it's not just for camping, for travel in general, when you're traveling solo, listen to your gut instinct. I've had a lot of situations in my travels where you either run into someone, or even like I was on a hike in Alaska and all of a sudden I was like, this doesn't feel good. I don't like it. And I listened to that and turned around and left. Or you meet someone, they're like, oh, where are you staying? And you just lie. And it comes out of your mouth because you're like, I don't want this person to know where I'm staying. And that's totally okay. I've walked into Airbnbs that I've paid good money for and gone, no, I don't like it, and walked out and just lost the money. And that, it's always worth it to leave. Always worth it to leave. So if you have that little feeling inside that's like, there's something off about the situation, listen to that. Trust that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I am totally someone that trusts my gut. I travel a lot alone. I don't typically camp very often alone, but I think I've got like a little bit of fears and certain stuff that I'm still kind of working on. But definitely I always trust my gut. I mean, one time I was gonna hike to there's some hot springs north of LA, but it's like a 15-mile overnight camping trip, and I was gonna go do that. But yeah, the night before I had a dream about a mountain lion, and so I woke up and I was like, I'm not going.
Because that area has a higher density of mountain lions than anywhere else in California. So your dream might have been a premonition.
Yeah, so I trusted my gut on that one and stayed home, or I went and did a different hike. But also I love that you mentioned that you do a lot of research, because I think that, I get questions a lot about how they should prepare for hiking. Not only that, but also what they should bring with them. And I think that not researching where you're going is one of the biggest pitfalls of people that like go out into the wild and the wilderness. I know I always look really closely at trail maps and area maps before I go out, and I always print a map out or have one on my phone or in my backpack. And I think that's such an underrated thing that people don't do anymore because we're so reliant on technology. I also know that you said you brought a knife with you, which I always do too. Is there anything else that you never leave home without when you're going hiking?
When I'm going hiking or backpacking, you mentioned the research and being really clear on the area, the trails, all of that. And yeah, I'm with you. I don't rely on technology because sometimes it just doesn't work out there. So I always have a printed map with me. You can download maps on your phone if you trust that your phone is going to work the whole time, but sometimes it doesn't. So I always do that. I always carry the knife. I carry some pepper spray. I always carry layers depending on where I'm going. And that's something that we learned a lot from Lost in the Wild. When you look at some of these cases, I always tell people that a lot of our cases were kind of like a horror movie in hindsight, where you're like, why did you do that? Don't go in there. Why did you not bring that? It was really rare to have a case where you're like, wow, these people did everything right and still something bad happened. I would say Panama was that case for me. But those two women like really couldn't have done anything differently, and something bad happened to them. But in a lot of our cases, people just were not prepared. They were not prepared for the environment. They weren't dressed right. They didn't have, the gear that they needed. You always clearly, goes without saying, but should be said, is make sure you have enough water on you. I always have a backpack and I have layers. When I was hiking in Alaska, I would start the hike in a tank top and finish the hike with like 3 coats, a hat, gloves, and anything I could find wrapped up around me, because the weather can change so drastically. And even in a warm environment, even in a jungle, you can still succumb to hypothermia if you end up wet. If you you're going to be uncomfortable. Like, you might as well prepare yourself as if you're going to stay the night, even if you're not, just because you never know. Like, I have a little emergency shelter. It's like a little tent that keeps you warm. I have a compass with me that I carry. I try not to be the doom gloom hiker and camper, but I always try to make sure that I put myself in a situation where if something happened, I would have everything that I needed to potentially stay the night out there.
Yeah, I do that too. I always have like duct tape, emergency warm blanket, and a knife, and extra water, extra food, extra layers. Those things are so important. And I know Al Kabak in the chat just said, don't forget water. Yeah, I always bring extra water and have like either a life straw or some other thing to be able to filter water. And one of the things that I love so much about Lost in the Wild was that all of these cases were just seemingly people just out to explore, and they were never heard from again. I especially liked your episode on Colorado because my mom is from there. And so that was like very close to home for me, with so many people that just go out into the mountains. They're not prepared. But I also was like, I love mysteries. So just learning about the potential of, mining and how that affected potentially his disappearance was really interesting and fascinating.
I think he fell in a mine. I think JJ's conclusion was that he was murdered, or that he took off. I can't remember, but it's the thing about Lost in the Wild that makes it so interesting is that we go boots on the ground. We follow these people's footsteps. So when you do that, you get to have the realizations that those people might have had. And that was actually our first episode that we filmed, was in Colorado. And I found it so interesting because when we went up that mountain and we were there overnight, I remember, like, I think I went off to pee in the bushes. And as I did, all of a sudden there's a cliff right there. And I'm like, oh God, like, I'm glad I saw this. And below that, you're so high up the mountain. We were way, way up there. And below that, you can see the I-70. And there's civilization, like, below you. And I remember standing there thinking, wow, if Keith came up here and it was getting dark, we saw the mountain lion claw marks on the tree. And they were fresh. We were like, wow, this is terrifying, kind of awesome. And, if he had seen something like that, if he heard something at night, the woods at night are scary. Like, everything makes a sound. Everything is super creepy. Like, your imagination plays tricks on you. And I pictured this man out there who, by the way, was hungover, was wearing jeans, like tennis shoes, and like a flannel, didn't have any water with him, had nothing with him. And if you imagine that he's out there, it's dark, he's hearing like creepy noises, he's like, what's that? He's probably cold, it rained on us, he's exhausted, and he sees the I-70 below him. And I think that what he did is he was just like, I got to get down there. And instead of following the trail back, which is the long but safer way back, I think he just tried to go, as he called it, Chicago style, through the woods and go down. And that area is littered with mine shafts. Like the ones that we went in, the one that JJ rappelled down into, they're everywhere. So all you have to do is slip, tumble, fall. You fall into one of those and no one will ever find you again.
Yeah, it's so funny too, because my mom grew up in Aspen, and my whole life, she's just told me about all these stories, how as kids, they would go into the mine shafts and they would dig for what she calls crucibles, but they are basically like old mining cups and like other, things that I guess the miners would leave behind, and old relics and things like that. So I've heard stories of these old mines in Colorado my whole life, and
They play in those mines. It's so scary. It's like an after-school special.
I know, right? Well, also in Aspen, when she was growing up, they burned coal in the fireplaces still. So definitely a different life. But also with mountain lions, my aunt lives in Glenwood Springs, and there's mountain lions in her backyard.
Yeah.
So definitely lots of different ways you could go out in the wilderness when you're not prepared.
With the mountain lion, that theory came up a lot with Keith, and it came up with jaguars and with tigers and other places. And the truth is, like, if something like that were to happen, there's, as gruesome as it is, there's usually a lot of remnants left behind. Like, they're not clean killers. It's kind of like in Tiger King with Carol's husband. You sort of feel like there'd be something left behind. Like, animals are not really that clean when they eat, and that's why I think in Keith's case he probably ended up in the mine shaft.
Yeah, I think Carol Baskin's husband probably ended up in a swamp or in the ocean. I also wanted to ask you about, first let me ask you a couple questions that came up in the chat. Penultimate Hortotter says, how you feel about doorways and parking lots in areas that you might not be familiar with when you're like maybe walking around at night or traveling in areas that you haven't been before.
Doorways and parking lots. doorways and parking lots, or I guess are scary anywhere you go. I mean, it's all part of. So a question that people ask me when we travel internationally into what people would call kind of wild destinations is, how do you stay safe? And my answer is the same way that you do at home. You know, if you were getting in your car in a parking lot at night, or a parking garage, or walking into a building, you know, that you don't know what's in there, you would be on alert, and you would be cautious, and you would take your time, and, you know, that's how you would behave anywhere else you go in the world. So I think there's nothing that's scarier out somewhere else than there is in our own backyard. And again, it kind of goes back to instincts, and it goes back to just kind of the foundation of being a safety conscious person. And I think you develop that instinct even more when you travel alone, and more so even if you're a female traveling alone, to just always be cautious. Not paranoid, but cautious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know when I travel alone, I don't do things that would put me at risk. I am very cautious. People ask me about that a lot too. Like I won't go to nightclubs or bars late at night by myself. I'm not going to go wander around in the dark late at night in the middle of a city that I'm unfamiliar with. I am very much more cautious and planned about where I'm going to go if it is outside of daytime hours. So those are the things that I do too to keep safe. And I think it is just important to always be on your guard. And not, you know, I think also with like public transportation and stuff, you can't just like throw your stuff around, and, you know, pickpocketing does happen. So people just need to be more aware of their surroundings.
Yeah, you have to be. You know, one lesson that I learned really early on that I thought was really good is, when you're in a foreign country, don't ever let a cab choose you. Always choose the cab. You know, when you get out of an airport, or you get out of a hotel, or you're walking around a city, and you have cab drivers, and they're like, hey, taxi, come here. Don't. Like, you pick the taxi. You go to the guy who's not asking you to get in his car, and you go with that.
Yeah, I actually had that happen to me in Bali once. I was with my boyfriend, and we landed in the airport, and immediately someone took my luggage and was just like, follow me this way. And my boyfriend was like, what are you doing? Don't give her luggage away. And I was like, I have no idea what's happening. But who knows where they would have taken us?
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know. So it's always better to be cautious, to be safe, and play the game by your rules, not somebody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question we had going back to Lost in the Wild was if you're familiar with the disappearance of Craig Button and Steve Fawcett.
They sound familiar, but I'm not actually. I wonder if they're from the 411 books, because a lot of people have been asking us about the 411 books, and those are mostly, I believe, U.S. based in national parks, which if we did a second season, so we're crossing our fingers about that, we would love to do more stateside cases, and of course more international. It's interesting though, because we get emails all the time from family members asking us to look into the disappearances of their family. So I hope we get to tell more stories.
I hope you get a season 2 as well, because I would be really excited about it. Talking about the missing 411, I watch those videos on YouTube all the time. If that's what you guys were referring to in the chat.
Yeah, exactly it.
The M Cave is like one that I've always been really interested in Nevada, but there's tons of other ones. I mean, a lot of them reference like Bigfoot and some other like mystical things, but I would love for you guys to look into that and give us some more details on what really happened to these people.
I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people, when they don't have an answer to something, start to really reach into the paranormal. And we ran into that on Lost in the Wild. And JJ and I are not paranormal investigators. We are not ghost hunters remotely at all, actually. We're definitely the journalistic, scientific skeptics, you know, and we're open-minded. Look, if you can prove something, that's great. If the Yeti were to turn up right here, I'd be like, great, you're real. But until then, I'll be skeptical. But we did run into a lot of cultural beliefs that start to transition into that world, especially in Malaysia and the Philippines and Zimbabwe. You have a lot of local folklore and mythology that affects the cases. And it's super interesting because, you know, we got to the point where we were kind of at a standstill because so many people, including the authorities, really believed that these people were taken by the Orang Bunyan or the Encanto and the Aswang, that you start to think, well, maybe even in your search efforts, you weren't as thorough as you should have been because you already had this preconceived notion that there was a paranormal, mystical element to this case. And that was something I didn't really give a lot of thought to leading into the show, that we would run into that as much as we did. We did. The mountain in Zimbabwe, people wouldn't go on that mountain. Like, that mountain is considered to be cursed. And a lot of people who we spoke to were like, you're insane. Like, we would never, ever go up there.
Well, some weird things did happen. I mean, those men appearing in the middle of the night was certainly unnerving.
Yeah, we're pretty positive that those were poachers who had seen us up on the mountain, because we stayed 2 nights up on the mountain, and I'm almost positive that they had seen us. And the thing is, like, those guys are armed. If they wanted to shoot us, if they wanted to harm us, they would have. So yeah, we think that they were most likely just trying to get rid of us. They probably saw us wandering around, saw that we had cameras, which, you know, you're probably not going to fire on people with cameras unless you're going to come back and take their tapes. And I think they mostly were just like, let's get these people out of here. And we had worked with an anti-poaching unit in Zimbabwe, because they're the people who canvass that whole area. So we talked to them extensively about any evidence that they might have found. And we showed them that footage, and they were like, that is pretty consistent with what we believe to be poachers, because they go up there at night with flashlights and they set snares and then they check their snares. So that's most likely what that was. Because if it had been anybody else, like, no one's hiking that mountain at night, no one's just out there adventuring, they would have said something. So I think that they knew exactly where we were, they saw us, and they were just trying to intimidate us to get us out of there.
Yeah, and in that case, do you believe that the guy went up there to kill himself, or what was your...
I don't think he killed himself. I think he knew that he wasn't going to come back. I mean, we were told by multiple sources that he gave his watch, his wedding ring, and his phone to his wife. Why would you do that? And in every one of these cases, we reach out to the family and try to talk to them. A, because it gives us more information to go on, and 2, because it's super respectful. We want them to tell the story. And we're also investigators, so we want to know what this person was like. We want to know what their mental state was like whenever they left, they went missing. And the family did not want to speak to us. I actually got an interesting email after that episode, and it was someone who I want to say maybe was connected to the family, and he was like, well, why didn't you speak to the family? Like, they have a lot to say about this. And I'm like, when we tried, they didn't want to, and that person never wrote back. But there was also a lot of kind of, I guess, behind the scenes stuff with that case, where we couldn't really, for legal reasons, talk about it on camera too much. But I'll just say that everything kind of pointed in the direction that maybe Zaid was mixed up in some things that he shouldn't have been, and that he either was meeting someone on that mountain and knew it wouldn't end well for him, or he had a plan to just get the hell out of Dodge and maybe turn up somewhere else. But I do not think that Zaid died on that mountain. I really don't.
Wow, it's so fascinating. I love all these stories, and yeah, I really do hope there's going to be a season 2, because I think this could be just a series that goes on and on forever, because there's so many of these mysterious disappearances, not only here in the U.S. but everywhere.
We did a snippet of the ones that we had lined up. Like, we had 8 episodes to start out, and there were so many that we had on the docket that we have saved for upcoming seasons if that happens. Like, some really, really fascinating ones. And like I said, we constantly get emails, JJ and I both do, from people who, you know, are reaching out to us to look for their family members.
Wow, yeah, it's incredible. Now, I know you have another show that you have recently been working on, and I would love for you to share that with us if you can. Tell us a little bit about it.
I can. This one's awesome. So this one actually predated Lost in the Wild. Interestingly, I think this is the longest I've ever spent on 6 episodes. We started this one now, I think, 3 years ago, and we still have to finish it. And this one is called Enslaved, and it's a 6-part documentary series hosted by Samuel Jackson. And we basically go around the world and we tell the story of the transatlantic slave trade as told through the lens of diving shipwrecks. So we went all over the world, and as divers and journalists, we would examine these wrecks and we would tell the stories of the people aboard them. So that was an adventure to end all adventures, and it was kind of a roller coaster of emotions, from some of the most beautiful places and the most fascinating people to some of the most horrific and harrowing stories that you could ever imagine. And that took us all over the world as well. So that one was scheduled to start airing this June, but because we were supposed to actually finish filming at the end of May, but COVID-19 came along and that has been pushed now, I suspect it'll probably air later in the year.
Wow, that sounds just an absolutely incredible, yeah, and heartbreaking experience probably as well. What were some of the places? Could you share a couple of the locations that you got to dive wrecks?
We did. So we were in South America. We were in the U.S. I probably can't share specific ones. Trying to think of what they've put out in the press releases, but they're particular about us not oversharing. In Europe, I know some of the team went to Africa as well. We had a lot of moving parts in this one, like Sam Jackson, Afla, Simca, our dive team. So, and I still haven't seen how it's all been put together. So I'm actually super, super curious. I've seen little snippets of it and it looks amazing, but we were all over the world. I mean, we went diving in some of the coldest water I've ever been in my life, in some of the roughest seas. We got to one location we were scheduled to dive, and we arrived to our hotel and it's right on the water. And the hotel is shaking from being pounded by monster waves. And we're like, oh, we're supposed to dive in this. And we tried to go out. The location that we were going to was 3 hours in each direction by boat in really cold conditions. And the first 2 days we tried to go out, we had to turn around because the waves were coming over the boat. Like there was no way you were going to put divers in the water. So we had some harrowing experiences in that one.
It sounds like it. That sounds pretty scary. And I know that you're a big scuba diver, so I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your love for that and your partnership with Shark Allies. And if I can, I'm going to pull up a few of your photos here from your website and show people a couple of your pictures with sharks.
I do love sharks. I've been scuba diving for probably 15 years, and I love scuba diving where it's warranted. I love free diving even more. That's kind of my favorite. But there's definitely a time and a place where scuba diving is still the go-to. And sharks, I have loved my whole life, and I was fortunate enough to get to team up with the Shark Allies team and Stephanie Brendel and Laurel over there. They are just two of the most badass women I've ever met in my life, and Erica. It's all women, interestingly enough. And we are all about shark and ocean conservation and changing the image of sharks, and also legislation that's going to help sharks. Stephanie has been in Florida for the last couple of months working on a bill that's going to ban the sale and trade of shark fins, because Florida is right now the biggest port through which fins come in to go to Asian markets. So the act of finning has already been illegal in the United States, which means cutting off a shark's fins and throwing the body back into the water. But the shark fin trade, you could legally still land a shark, take off its fins. And we are trying to stop that, because obviously when you have loopholes like that, it's kind of like with ivory. We've learned over and over again in the wildlife trade that whenever you allow loopholes, you usually run into a problem. And Stephanie in 2010 spearheaded the shark fin, the ban of sale, trade, and possession of shark fins in Hawaii, which was the first state in the US to ban that in 2010. And she has since been pounding the pavement, and now Florida is next on the docket, and we're about this close to getting that passed there, which is incredible.
Yeah, that is incredible. I'm just going to pull up on the screen here the Shark Allies website. So if any of you guys want to check out what they're doing and either make a donation or read a bit more about what they're doing to end the fin trade, please go to their website. It's sharkallies.com, and it's up on the screen now for you guys to see if you want more information. I know when I've traveled too, especially in Asia, it's always heartbreaking to see, these places that still have shark fin soup and still are not really doing anything to end the shark trade. So for those people that don't know much about sharks, most of our shark species have declined by more than 90%, I think. And it is pretty heartbreaking. I know you've spent a lot of time in the water swimming with sharks in the last couple of years. And I know I've watched your videos and read your articles on Guadalupe, and it looks so beautiful. It's definitely a place that I would love to go to. Will you tell people a little bit more about your experience? And, I know that I used to be extremely afraid of the ocean. And when I first went diving with sharks, that fear really started to go away. It really helped me get over that fear.
Well, I think that's exactly it. And most of the people who are so scared of sharks have never experienced them in person. And all we really know about sharks is what we see on TV and the media, which I'm a part of. It usually blows that way out of proportion and they sensationalize it. They love it. And, there's headlines we'll read shark attack, or you've got, Shark Week with blood in the water and things like that. And, how many movies are out there in Hollywood that the shark is the villain in? I mean, has there ever been a movie where the shark is the hero of the film? I don't think there has been. And so that's all people know. So for me, one of the most rewarding and awesome experiences in the world is when we go out to someplace like Guadalupe Bay and you get in the water and you have people get in the water with sharks for the first time ever, and they're getting in the water with great whites. Isla Guadalupe is off the coast of Mexico, and it is the best place in the world to see great white sharks. The water is warm, it's usually around 70 degrees, it's crystal clear, visibility can be 80 to 100 feet, and from August to November, there are so many white sharks there. It's not like, ooh, I hope I get to see a shark. It's you will see probably 30 different individuals coming through in the days that you're diving. And the coolest thing is when you go in to the cage, the whites will show up and they will swim by and they will look at each diver in the cage. And they have these beautiful big eyes and they have a black pupil and they're blue on the outside. And they're so intelligent and they're really calm and cool. They're not like, oh, I got to get into that cage and I got to eat everyone in there. Right. Like they really they're curious. They'll come in and take a look at you. So having people have that experience and then get out of the cage, I've seen people like have come to God moments, have crying, tears. Like it's such a neat thing to see this misconception of what these animals are get broken down with people. And that's been the case everywhere I've been. I did a show for Travel Channel in St. Croix, and we were going down there, and we never spearfish on scuba, by the way. I know that some people do. I think it's very unsportsmanlike. But we had pole spears, and we were spearfishing for lionfish because they're an invasive species, so we're just trying to eradicate them. And in St. Croix, the sharks, so the lionfish are not a prey item for these sharks because they don't belong there. They're non-native. But the sharks have learned that if the fish is speared, then they can avoid the poisonous spines that they have on there, the venomous spines that they have, and they can take the fish. So the sharks will actually follow you. And I had my pole spear clipped onto my BCD, and the sharks are so smart, and these are reef sharks, that the moment I unclipped it, they were like, oh, hey, and they'd swim right next to you. And you'd have to wait for them to go away to kind of lose interest and swim away before you would take a fish, because the moment you hit the fish, the sharks would come in. And you don't want them to take your spear. So I had split fins on and I would like kick off the fish and then they would come in and grab it. But I remember our DP's wife is a National Geographic photographer, and she's just amazing, amazing, amazing woman. And she was concerned about getting in the water with sharks. After that experience, she is like now shark diver extraordinaire. Like she witnessed what they were like and was in the water with them. She's been out to Socorro now in Jupiter. Like she's just, it makes me so happy to see that someone responded that way to these animals that they were initially afraid of.
Yeah, I love that. And I know that's kind of the similar experience for myself. I grew up on a lake and my sister would always feed the fish with mussels when we would go snorkeling. And so we would have all these fish around me, and for whatever reason, it just terrified me. So when I was in my 20s, I went and swam with sharks in the Bahamas for the first time. And yeah, you really do see how beautiful they are. And I was scared at first because I went down in the water and there was 30 or 40 sharks, and one swam right at me and then just like went over my head. And you see how beautiful and gentle they are. And I've gone spearfishing too, out in the Bahamas. I actually used to live there, so I know all about lionfish, and they make great ceviche as well.
Mm-hmm. They're delicious.
But yeah, they're just such magical creatures, and I wish people would give them more respect as well. Definitely.
I do. Well, we're working towards that.
Yeah, we are. I also wanted to ask you about the Explorers Club, because it's such an amazing and like really cool organization. I know you're a member. Would you tell people a little bit more about the Explorers Club and how you got into that organization?
Well, the Explorers Club is that. It's a club for scientists and explorers and conservationists and people who are in the space of exploring this planet and immersing themselves and putting that out into the world. So, everyone from scientists to journalists to, some of the most famous explorers in the world are members of the Explorers Club. And I was asked a few years ago to be a part of it. And I initially said no, not because I didn't think it was the coolest thing ever. I thought it was so cool that I wasn't cool enough to be a part of it. And finally, probably 2 years later, I went, wow, this is such a cool organization. Like, I really do want to be a part of this. And you have to fill out a form. You have to tell them all about yourself and just sit there and wait with crossed fingers that they will accept you and that the members will accept you. And they did. And I got to become a fellow at the Explorers Club. And it's a huge honor to be part of that community. And it is, they've been so supportive of everything that we're doing for the shows. I love the talks that they give. I love everything that they represent. And it is just, in a world today where I think a lot of the values of what people hold to be, I guess, extraordinary has been diluted a little bit by concepts like social media. And substance to me is always still the most important thing in what you're putting out to the world. And they accept and they represent and they put out into the world like actual authentic exploration, people who are still exploring this world, people who are still telling others and educating others about it. And that is invaluable to me, to be part of an organization like that, where there is actual substance, where there is merit, where there is scientific information that is being put out to the public in a consumable way, where people gain an understanding about something they didn't have before. They, put out documentaries, they give talks. It's all about educating people and getting people excited about the world that we live in and everything that it offers.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and I also just think it's really cool because if, like, Indiana Jones was a real person, he would be a member of the Explorers Club.
100%. 100%.
So I think it's really awesome that they're still around because it is such an old organization that has been going for so many decades, and they are, people think that there's nothing left to be explored, but there's still so many things to be explored. So I think it's such a cool thing.
Always so much to be explored. There are new species to be discovered. There are places that no one has set foot yet. There are things that we need to learn about. I mean, the depths of our ocean, we don't even know what is down there ultimately. So
that's true.
There's still a lot of exploration to be done.
There's so much. And I did have a couple questions that I brought over from social media that I wanted to ask you from some people over there. One of the questions was, what are the top destinations you want to see after we get done with this kind of global lockdown?
I want to go somewhere with warm water. I really want to go. I want to go diving in warm water. My top destination, I've never been to New Zealand. I really, really want to go to New Zealand. We were actually going to go over this past New Year, and then for scheduling reasons, we couldn't do it. So New Zealand is at the top of my list. There are several island nations that I would like to visit just because I've sat on Google Earth and looked at the coral reefs around them and gone, I want to dive that. So there's that. There is a specific island off Tahiti that a good friend of mine, Josh, who's actually enslaved, that he went to, and he had the most wonderful experience going out and diving with tiger sharks and spearfishing out there. And that's already on my docket. I've already reached out. As a matter of fact, that was kind of planned before the whole COVID-19 thing. So to reschedule that. So I would say Tahiti and New Zealand are at the top of my list. How about you?
Oh, for me, I don't know, it's hard. I really had planned on doing some Eastern European exploration this summer and also potentially going to Alaska to hike Denali. So those were things that I had wanted to do. So we'll see what happens when this ends and, what season it is, I guess. But I really wanted to go hike in Slovenia, actually. So
wow.
Hopefully there'll be some opportunities for that when we get done with all of this. Someone else wanted to ask you, what was one of the best things that you realized during lockdown? Whether that be like something that you liked that you didn't know you liked, or something with personal development or a connection.
best things that I think, you don't know what you have until it's gone, right?
Yeah.
And to me, travel has been a part of my lifeblood, my career, my passion, my hobby, my everything for my whole life. I've been traveling since I was a baby, like in my parents' backpack. And to not have access to that as readily as we're used to has been tough, but it's also made me incredibly grateful. Like I've spent a lot of time looking back on trips that I've done, and especially in the last year, between the two shows that I was working on, I was on the road for 7 months this year. And I got to go to some of the most incredible destinations in the world, from the Galapagos to Zimbabwe to India to Malaysia to the Philippines. I mean, who gets to work in the Galapagos outside of scientists, basically, and environmentalists? So I became that much more grateful for the life that I have. And I've always been super grateful that this is my career and my life and my path. But I think even more so now, the fact that I travel for a living and I get to experience some of the coolest places in the world and call that work has really resonated strongly with me. And it's made me that much more excited, like we just talked about, to get back out into the world and to do all these super awesome things.
Yeah, and it is National Park Week, so I wanted to ask you also, do you have a favorite national park?
Oh God, they're all so different and amazing. Like I'm sure you do too. I always have the national parks pass every year,
Yep.
and God, they're incredible. I mean, we're so blessed here in California. We have Joshua Tree just around the corner, and that is so spectacular. Death Valley, that's so amazing. Everglades is one of my favorite parks because ever since I was a kid, like we would road trip there, and then we worked in Florida for Enslaved, and I had a couple down days, and I visited the Everglades. I mean, Yosemite, Yellowstone. My parents used to live in Idaho, so used to visit Yellowstone. It's just so amazing. I mean, I think people don't realize how vast and varied this country is in terms of our natural resources and what we have. And especially living in California, the fact that we live in Los Angeles and I can pack up my car and go camping, I can go to Yosemite, I can go to Anza Borrego, which most people don't know about, or Carrizo Plain National Monument, which is up the 33 and 33 and the 160, I think, above Ojai.
Oh, I haven't
And
been to that one.
no, most people haven't. And I'll tell you, it is the best super bloom. People chase the super bloom all over the place. Carrizo Plain has consistently had the best super bloom I've ever seen in my life. And there's so national parks, state parks, national monuments, like BLM land is some of my favorite. People don't realize public land, Bureau of Land Management is what that stands for. But some people don't know. I posted that and they're like, Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, yes, they do. But I'm talking about BLM land. It is, that's our land. That is public land where you can go and you can hike and you can camp and you can explore. And we are so fortunate in this country to have so many wild spaces that belong to us. Or White Sands, which is now a national park, became a national park in February, which I have actually not been to yet. It's closed now. I thought about going, but it's closed. So we have so much.
Yeah, when this first happened, I was like, oh, I'm just going to go on a road trip and go to Death Valley. And then obviously now the parks are closed, which worries me about vandalism. But yes, I mean, we do have so many beautiful places, especially here in California, and the West in general just has so much BLM land. Now, do you have a favorite camping location that you go back to again and again?
I do a lot of, just for purposes of ease living in Los Angeles, I go up the 33 and go into Ojai a lot because there's a lot of dispersed camping. I'm not really a campground person so much. I like the dispersed camping, which just means basically boondocking. You go off on roads and you camp and you do it responsibly. You try to find fire pits that are already made. If not, you build your own. Obviously, you clean up after yourself. But being out in the middle of the wilderness with just the stars over you and going to sleep to coyotes and owls and having a campfire in the middle of nowhere with no one else around, that's my favorite. So I escape up the 33 into Los Padres National Forest a lot. I also love Anza Borrego, which is down south. Have you been to Anza Borrego?
Yeah, I have, and I love both those areas. I actually hiked last year in Ojai for the first time and was like, why have I never been here? Because Los Padres is amazing, and so is Ojai. But yeah, Anza Borrego is great. There's, Super Bloom there as well, and some great trails.
That place is amazing. Channel Islands National Park is just right off our coast. The fact that we have Catalina, we go free diving and spearfishing out there all the time. As a matter of fact, I think on Wednesday, We're going to take the boat out and go to Santa Barbara Island, San Clemente, Catalina Island, and explore the kelp forest there. And we're so fortunate. You mentioned that hike, and I've done that hike too, Sespe to Willett Hot Springs and Sespe Hot Springs. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I just bought Mark a bunch of camping gear because I want him to start backpacking with me more. And that's the hike that I'm trying to sell him on right now. I'm like, it's 15 miles there and back. I'm like, you can do it. You can do it.
Yeah, I have been wanting to do that one. I need a buddy to go with, I think.
You want to go?
I definitely do. I also wanted to just ask you a couple more things about the travel. We did have one other question in the chat. Have you ever done the Appalachian Trail?
I have not. I have not done the Appalachian Trail. Love to do that. The PCT, the Appalachian, I never have.
Yeah, I haven't done much really, really long distance hiking. I have done a little bit of the Appalachian Trail. I actually was just in Atlanta for the last couple of months, so I went up to the Smoky Mountains a couple of times, and the trails up there are beautiful.
They are. I've hiked in the Smokies, and it's spectacular. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. And I know that people in the chat are naming off a lot of their favorite parks, and I love that. So we're glad that you guys all love national parks. What's next for you, Kinga? Do you have any other projects that may be coming up other than the ones that you mentioned, or?
Well, I did, and then COVID-19 hit. So you're kind of looking at it. Like today it's going to be, do I sit on the couch? Do I sit in the backyard? Do I take a walk around the neighborhood with the dog? Well, it's a wait and see. We still have to finish Enslaved, which is going to happen somewhere in the Caribbean in warm water, which I was very much looking forward to. But hopefully that will happen as soon as this is done. I had a project lined up where I was going to be gone again for the majority of the back end of this year that has now been pushed to 2021. And we're still waiting to see what happens with Lost in the Wild, if we get another season. And then there was another show that I was in talks for, but it's like crickets there. There's just, right now, it's a wait and see. How about you?
Well, you're looking at it also. I'm just doing
a nice, bright, sunny apartment. It's
beautiful. This is my green screen.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So I tricked you all. I don't have a William and Sonoma home, but I would love one.
That is gorgeous. I was sold. I was like, I have to come over for tea. That's beautiful.
I know. I wish. If I could just stumble into this later, that would be great. No, but I'm just working on, I have a lot of videos that I'm still editing and things to get out here on YouTube. So stuff is coming down the line for that. And one day we'll go back to work, whenever that is. And I'll be back on this movie I've been working on, Red Notice, with The Rock. So.
Oh, wow. That's great. Because you do both adventure hosting and you do stunts as well.
Yeah, I do. And so since January, I've been on a movie called Red Notice in Atlanta with Ryan Reynolds and The Rock and Gal Gadot. So we got shut down with about 6 weeks left of filming. So my phone alarm went off yesterday and was like, "You're supposed to be in London today." And I was like, no.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, Mark was in Atlanta for 4 months working on a Marvel show. And then they came back here and got shut down right when this all started too.
Yeah, so lots of changes for all of us here, just like all of you guys. I do want to just thank everyone that joined us live, and for those of you that are watching afterwards, if you have any questions for me or Kinga, please let us know in the comments, and we'll be sure to answer them as best we can. And tune into Lost in the Wild, guys, because if you haven't watched it, it's amazing. You're going to have your curiosity sparked, and you're going to be throwing theories together on what happened to these people. So definitely go check it out. I think there's a marathon today. Is that correct?
What happened this morning. That's what we were up so early for. It was, I think, started at 7 a.m. on the East Coast, and I don't think it's going here anymore. I think it maybe already wrapped up.
Well, I'm sure it will be on again, and you can check it out on Hulu and some of the other streaming platforms as well. So thanks again for joining us, Kinga. Thank you so much for coming on today. I loved chatting with you all about travel and your shows. So thank you again, and thanks, guys, for joining us.
Thank you.